I have everything unpinned, and I'm starting with the front torso. I've left my dart secure, and I've replaced the pins with tape so that it doesn't ripple here. And I've made sure that my intake, this part of my dart, is going downward. You always want your horizontally shaped darts to go downward, your intake. Your vertical darts like this one, the intake will go towards center front. So I have it taped securely so it won't come apart. The next thing I did was I took a ruler and my pen, and I cleaned up the lines, my little dash lines, with my ruler and my pen. You notice some of them are out of shape a little bit, but I tried to pick the most consistent straight line I could to go across this area of the torso above the waist. Then in the waist suppression, I've used my vary curve, and I've started shaping the high hip and the waist suppression so that it contours back to my form. Now this, sometimes it's better to put this vary curve downward, so you just have to look at your dots, your dash lines, and see which one joins the hip better. Sometimes when you have the tight part of this hip, the vary curve and the high hip, it causes a bubble up here, so be aware of that. Sometimes it's better to use it turned downward so you get a nice smooth arc on the hip instead of a bubble here. So that's a good little hint when you're using the vary curve. Now once I have this, I'm going to go ahead and do the shoulder seam the same way with a straight edge right here. So I'm going to take my dash line and I'm going to draw in a solid line. The reason I want these solid lines, now I have something to trace off onto my paper. Now if you can cut accurately, it's okay to go ahead and trim these off and use the edge. If you have trouble doing that, you may want to use a piece of cardboard and a thumbtack or a tracing wheel and perforate this line onto the paper. It just depends on how well you can cut. So I'm going to go ahead and carefully cut mine off right on the line, being sure that I stay very, very exact to that line. See, you want to stay clean. And then I want to get this little corner here, keeping this square if possible. Now, one other thing I need to fix. See how I've got a flat space in my armhole here? That's where I had the tuck. Now I don't want to go too far off course, but I do want to smooth that little flat area out. So I'm going to go in here and just draw in this little line here so that I can get rid of that little flat area. It's very small, but it needs to be a nice smooth transition there. So I'm going to just take this out to 0 to 0. Now I have that and that done, and I have my dart. This dart is good, so it's time now to release this dart. And I want to show you what I was talking about on the form. See the dash line here? It's very easy now to just connect these little dashes and create my dart legs. See, and I mark my dart here. Now, my dart is slightly higher than my apex, where my apex is. And that happens sometimes when you're draping because of the roundness of the bust arc. You can leave it if you want, or I can lower this dart down when I start creating my dart on my paper. And I'll show you how to do that as we go. So the next thing is, I've drawn a straight line here on my paper, and that's going to represent the center front of my garment. So I'm going to put this line, the center front of my drape, right on top of that line. And you can use weights, tape, or both to hold it down. So I'm going to put a weight in the middle and a little tape at my center front neck and a little tape at the hem here. And then I'm going to smooth it out, and I'm going to tape all the way around my muslin, my torso muslin, my drape block, what we draped off of, which is looking really beautiful, by the way. And then I'm going to begin tracing it off onto the paper. So, I'm not really concerned about this line at the moment, but I do want my torso line here. So I'm going to use my cardboard, and I'm going to put it up under here so that I can get my trace off of here. And I'm going to use my tracing wheel. Again, if you don't have a tracing wheel and you have a large pen or a thumbtack, you can use that as well. But I just want to go along through here, and I want to try to pull out all my interior lines. So I'm using this straight line right along here. Now again, I could have just trimmed this off, if I wanted to. But if I'm not really sure of where I'm going with it, it's probably better not to trim, because if you trim it off, you won't know the alternative if you have a little question in your line, like where it should be. So short little dash lines with this. I want to draw my dart legs in right here. I'm going to draw in where this is now. I may adjust it to my apex. Most certainly I want my apex in here. I want the dart point on both ends of this dart. And I also want the corrected suppression right here at the waistline. I don't really need anything else off this dart. That's enough to do the job. But I do want to get my waist suppression in here according to the dash line I drew. I also want my HBL line in here. That's very important as well. And I already have this one. The rest of the lines can be traced off with my pen. So I'm going to use my black pen. And I still, again, just use a dash line, because I'll need to clean this up again once I remove my muslin. So I just want a dash line around through here. And my shoulder's straight, so all I need is the two ends, because the middle part of it's straight anyway. And I get my neckline in here. And I already have my center front mark because I started with that. So everything's marked, but you always want to make sure you check again. My dart legs here, my dart point, apex, waist suppression, waistline, and HBL. Once you know you've got everything marked, just simply pull the muslin away, leave the tape on your paper, because some of your tape may have markings on it and you'll lose them if you try to pull it off. Plus you could rip your paper. So you just hold your thumb on your tape and just release the muslin out from under it like such. And then push all the tape back down. And you notice you've got this nice little perforated drawing here. So now we can come back and we can start cleaning this up. So I'm going to go along here. I'm going to start right where my my underarm is, and I'm going to draw in this line, and I'm going to draw in this line. These are relatively straight lines until I get to the suppression. Now it starts to curve. This one's already drawn in, and I'm going to draw in my shoulder. And that takes care of my exterior straight lines. The rest of this is going to be used with a very curve or French curve. So right at the waist suppression, I'm going to find the perforated dots, and I'm going to connect them. I'm going to turn my very curve over and get the rest of these dots. Now I may not get them all, but I'll get as many as I can. See how pretty that's shaping up? And then this gets rather straight down here, so I'm going to use a very little part of my curve on my very curve. So there's my side seam. Now right here where my dart's going to go, I'm not drawing this in. I'm going to come back and I want to put a bubble here. And I'm going to fold this dart and clean this up so the dart contour will be exactly what I need when I sew it up. So remember, bubble your dart there, and that way you'll have the right look there. Now this HBL line must be square to center front. And you can see there's a little bit of a discrepancy in there. This happens because sometimes the form will move on you a little bit. Now right out here, it has a tendency to curve ever such a little bit at the side seam. Because the body's round, sometimes this line will lift up just slightly here. But you want to make sure this stays square and get the majority of your dash lines in congruency here, and you'll be fine. Same thing at the waist. I want to start off square right here, right at this point. And this one lifts up a little bit right here where the dart is. So let's see here, we're going to come out here square. So I want to kind of move my very curve. It's very subtle of a curve here, so trying to line up most of my little dash lines. See, and I've got one a little high, one a little low, but that gets me a lot closer to my actual waist level line. So you want to kind of straighten these things out. Now let's talk about this dart. I want to go from this dart point right here, and I want to go to the top dart point, and I want to put back in my center fold line. Now notice how my ruler is laying here. It's a little bit closer at the top than it is the bottom. That is acceptable as long as it's not an extreme amount. Ideally, it's nice to have it straight so it's level on both sides for a drape. But sometimes, if you're working on someone that has a very full hip and a narrow bust area, You may have to angle this dart slightly this way so that it's closer at the top and wider at the bottom. As long as you're not exceeding a 1/2 inch difference between the two, you should be okay either way. And I'm about a 1/4 inch different, so I'm going to go ahead and leave this because that seemed to work on the drape. So I'm going to go a 1/4 inch narrower at the top dart point than I am at the bottom. Right in here, it's very critical that whatever this total measurement is, see it's 1.5 inches, that I've got 3/4 on both sides of this line. This is most critical because if it's not balanced on this line evenly, that's when you get a twisted dart. So I want to come straight up here, and I'm going to go straight here, and same at the top, and this creates the fisheye or waistline dart. Now, you don't want to put punch holes right on these points. You want to come in just inside of them so that when you sew it, you don't have little holes or marks on your fabric. Now, this would apply mostly to a production situation where you're mass producing, but it's still a good idea to get in the habit of putting your actual marks. See, I'm going to put this one approximately a 1/2 inch below my actual dart point. That way it's buried inside the intake. And this one will be just inside my waist suppression, so I'll sew around that. That's my actual punch hole or dart mark that I'm going to use when I make this dart, knowing that I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch past it here and about 1/8 of an inch past it in the waist. So that's my long line dart. This one here is going to be the same way. This is going to be my dart point. Now let's talk about this, because this is the one where I can leave it high or I can move it and adjust it toward the apex. I'm going to adjust it toward the apex. So I'm going to find the center of my dart here. This is 1.25 inches. So center of that's going to be 5/8. That's going to be my fold line. I want to start with my fold line. And I'm going to direct my fold line, instead of going to the dart point I draped, I'm going to go straight to the apex with it. So I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to back off. See, it's about 1.25 inches away from my actual dart. So I'm going to back off this dart 1.25 inches from my apex. This is the apex right here. And that's going to be my dart point. See, I pivoted it down, hence the bubble. Now when I fold this dart, it will be aligned properly to the side seam. So I'm going to draw in my dart legs to the new adjusted dart. This happens a lot when you're draping. It's hard sometimes on the form to get this exactly right. Again, I'm going to come down at 1/2 inch from the dart point and make my punch hole or my mark so I know where to sew my dart to. This will bubble, and then I'll have my dart legs and I'll notch them. So if you're looking at this now, all we have to do is do our curves in our neckline and our armhole, and the front is done. So I'm going to come along here. Now, the first part of this, I've got to make sure I do this properly. You want to make sure you stay square right here. And it's a good idea, if you can, to be square here. Now, the shoulder point and neckline sometimes will not be square. They can or cannot be, but you definitely want this square and you want this square. So you want to take your ruler and draw square lines perpendicular from your side seam, your center front, and make sure you're leading in square. You don't want points or divots in these areas. And then from there, you just rest it on the square line and start connecting as many dots as you can. Sometimes you have to move your vary curve a few times, or your French curve, to get it just right. See, but there's my neckline, center front, my horizontal balance line, and then here's my armhole. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to try to get as many of these little dots connected at once as I can. And then just keep moving my vary curve until I get the rest of them done. So I might get the rest of these right in here. I'm going to fill this armhole in just a wee bit right here. I flattened out that one section, but I almost think it's a little too scooped right in here. Now, sometimes you'll see this on paper and you might want to make a slight adjustment. Don't veer too far off your original line though. I've only filled it in about 1/8. I'm comfortable filling it in because I can always take it back out if it's too much. But I wouldn't scoop into it because I'd rather put it back on the form and make sure that's correct. Now the last thing we're going to do here is I'm going to add another 2 inches on the bottom below my HBL line, because that was an 8-inch line. And I'd like to have my torso just slightly longer than that. Let's see, let's get this cardboard up from under here. That might help a little bit as well. So I'm going to come 2 inches below my HBL line. And it kicks up slightly at the side seam, like a 1/16 of an inch, but I want to keep that. So this will be the end. This is my HBL. And this is HPS right here. Okay, this is my front. I'm just going to put front torso block. Now on this front torso block, I'm not adding seam allowance because as I use this to make other patterns off of, I'm constantly going to have to remove the seam allowance before I get started, and that's just a delay. So this is my front torso basic pattern, or block. You can call it a block or a basic pattern. And I'm going to make a note to myself on this pattern that it has no seam allowance. That way I know it's a working block or basic pattern, and it's not made necessarily to cut out of the goods as is. So when I cut my muslin, I'll have to add my seam allowance on my muslin before I cut it out. And that's the front.